phonology, when we speak about consonant sounds, we usually distinguish between consonant phonemes and allophones of those phonemes in a language or accents of that language. Some of you might know a phoneme is an expression unit that does not mean anything in itself, but whose function is to distinguish one word from any other word. Let's take a minimal pair of two words. Big differs from the word pig by the initial sound only. That in turn makes the sound p and b phonemes in English. So meaning distinguishing units. Allophones, on the other hand, are, so to speak, physical realizations of a phoneme. We can say that a phoneme p, the English phoneme p, can have different allophonic manifestations. For example, can be pronounced with aspiration, right? Right, as in pig, or it can be pronounced without aspiration, as in speak, no aspiration. The good news for you is that the system of consonant phonemes in General British and General American is identical. And the two accents differ from each other only on the level of their allophones. The allophonic variation of consonants in English is the topic of the next lecture. And today I'm going to talk about the system of consonant phonemes in English. We usually describe consonant phonemes in terms of their place of articulation, manner of articulation, and their energy of articulation. Now, the term place of articulation speaks for itself and is about the place in the vocal tract where the constriction of the S stream occurs. Manner of articulation concerns the type of constriction we are dealing with. And energy of articulation is about the distinction between so-called voiceless and potentially voiced consonants in English. From the previous lecture, you should know that there are three resonating cavities where language sounds can be produced. The mouth cavity, the mouth, the nasal cavity, the nose, and the pharyngeal cavity, pharynx, or simply throat. Most of the English consonant sounds are produced in the mouth, and they're named by the passive articulators. I won't pronounce consonants by their nomination. For example, the phoneme pa has a name. It's called pa, as in peed. So I'll pronounce consonant sounds just like they are realized, just like they are pronounced. And I do that because I want you to practice the pronunciation of consonant sounds as we go. That might help you to visualize and remember the location of sounds better. Okay, let's get to it and take a look at the articulatory system. If we start with lips, then we find the first three consonant phonemes, which are p, b, and m. So they are made with both lips, hence the term bilabial. And here the active articulator, the lower lip, moves up toward the passive articulator, the upper lip, and creates a complete closure, constriction here. The next two sounds are f and v, and they are produced like bilabials, uh, but with the lower lip contacting not the upper lip, but the upper teeth. So the lower lip, the active articulator, goes up and touches the passive articulator, the upper teeth, thereby creating labiodental sounds f and v. The sounds th and z are made with the help of the tip of the tongue that goes up and touches the rear of the upper teeth. So, hence the term dental. The next series of sounds are t, d, s, z, l, and n. They are called alveolar because they are articulated at the alveolar ridge. You can find the alveolar ridge in the mouth behind your upper teeth. It feels like tiny small pillows. And their sounds are made with the tip or the blade of the tongue that goes up and creates a constriction with the alveolar ridge, alveolar sounds. There is only one post-alveolar sound in English, which is r, is made with the tip of the tongue that goes up, kind of approaches the alveolar ridge or the area behind the alveolar ridge without creating any firm blockage. The next sounds are ch, j, zh, and sh. They are made with a blade, the front of the tongue, and the rear of the alveolar ridge, or the front of the hard palate. Hence the term palato-alveolar. There is only one palatal sound in English, that is the sound y, that is made with the front of the tongue and the hard palate. So the front of the tongue moves up, kind of approach the hard palate without creating any complete closure. The sounds k, g, and n are articulated at the velum or the soft palate. Here, the active articulator, the back of the tongue, moves up toward the hard palate, thereby creating a constriction, a complete closure. There are no uvular sounds in English, nor are there any pharyngeal sounds pronounced in the pharynx, in the throat. But there is one sound which is pronounced in the glottis. So the glottis, as you might know, the opening between the vocal cords that are located in the larynx or the voice box. The sound is the glottal sound. We can find the consonant phonemes of English in the International Phonetic Alphabet. And according to their place of articulation, they're placed, located here in the upper row. So bilabial, dental alveolar, postalveolar, palatal velar, etc. Manner of articulation is about the type of the narrowing or stricture. In terms of the manner of articulation, we distinguish between complete closure, close approximation, and open approximation. Let's take a cursory glance at the X-ray cross-section of a speaking person. By focusing on what's going on in the mouth while we speak, we can see that the most active articulator is undoubtedly the tongue. It keeps moving tirelessly up and down in the mouth. And every time it goes up to the alveolar ridge, the hard palate, or the soft palate, that creates a narrowing in the vocal tract, a stricture. Well, the lips, they are also constantly opening or closing. And every time they meet, that creates a stricture. Another articulator that goes up and down in the mouth is the velum or the soft palate. And now let's take a look at the consonants that are made when the soft palate is raised and the consonants that are made when it is lowered. There are two types of consonants in English that are made with complete closure. The type of constriction where the passive and the active articulator are held firmly together and block the S stream. 8 of their sounds are called stops, and 3 of them are called nasals, or nasal stops, m, n, and ng. The term nasal derives from the name of the resonating cavity through which the air passes. It's the nose. And if you take a look at the picture below that shows the articulatory setting of the English consonant n, then you'll find that the soft palate is lowered. That means that the air from the lungs comes out through the nose and not the mouth. The English non-nasal stops consist of plosives and affricates. The mechanism of producing plosives is shown in the picture above. It demonstrates the articulatory setting of the plosive consonant t. First of all, the orange circles signal that the soft palate is raised, which means that the air from the lungs passes through the mouth and not through the nose. And second of all, when we pronounce the plosive t, we create another stricture of complete closure with the help of the tip of the tongue and the alveolar ridge. When they part, the compressed air that's been kept behind the closure rushes out with explosive force. Hence the term plosive consonants. The affricate stops ch and j have nothing to do with Africa. They're called so because they combine a plosive t or d and a fricative sound sh or j at the same place of articulation. In other words, when the articulators part, they don't do that quickly, as is the case with plosives, but they part relatively slowly, and that creates friction. There are 9 consonants in English that are made with close approximation. It's a type of stricture where the active articulator approaches the passive articulator without creating a complete closure. This mechanism is highlighted with an orange circle in the picture. When the air passes through the passage between the articulators, that creates friction. That is why we also call these consonants noisy sounds. There are 4 consonants in English that are made with open approximation. It's a type of stricture where the space between articulators is wide enough to allow the airstream to pass through without creating any audible friction. You can see the mechanism of their articulation in the picture on the example of the approximant sound r. Central approximants are also called non-lateral because when they're pronounced, the air escapes not along the sides of the tongue, as is the case with the lateral approximant l, but somewhere along the middle of the tongue. Approximants y and w are also known as glides or semivowels. And that's because the manner of their articulation is close to that of monophthongs. The only reason why they're categorized as consonants and not as vowels is because they are arranged within syllables like other English consonants. In this picture, you can see the articulatory setting of a consonant, which I'd like you to identify. You have to think of the place of articulation, so where in the vocal tract the stricture takes place. Manner of articulation, so the type of stricture, whether it's complete closure, close approximation, or broken approximation. Whether there is any velic closure, and whether the sound is voiced or voiceless. And the picture shows the voiced bilabial nasal stop m. English consonants, according to their manner of articulation, can be found in the International Phonetic Alphabet. To the left, plosive sounds are p, b, t, d, p, g. Nasals are m, n, and m. Fricatives are f, v, s, z, s, z, sh, j, and h. The approximant sound is r, and don't confuse it with the alveolar trill, r, which is found in Slavic languages such as Russian. And don't confuse it with the uvular trill, which sounds like this, r, which is found in French. Then there is palatal approximant y and lateral approximant l. And finally, the two affricate sounds ch and j, j. The approximant w has double articulation. That's because the stricture takes place both at the lips, hence bilabial, and at the velum. Here is the overview of English consonant system. So there are 24 consonants in all, and they can be divided into obstruents and sonorants. Obstruents can be divided into stops and fricatives, noisy consonants. And stops can be divided into plosives and affricates. Sonorants are voice sounds. They can be divided into nasals and approximants. And finally, approximants can be divided into the lateral sound l and into central approximants w, y, and r. Finally, energy of articulation concerns the distinction between voiceless and voiced consonants. This distinction goes only for obstruents, because sonorants, nasal stops, and approximants are potentially voiced in English. In the table up here, the terms voiceless and voiced are put in inverted commas. And that's because voiced consonants in English regularly undergo devoicing and retain full voice only when occurring between vowels and sonorants. Let's take a look at some examples. In the minimal pair seal and zeal, the leanest fricative z in zeal retains its full voice in the word initial position. In racer and razor, the leanest fricative z in razor retains its full voice between two vowels, the diphthong a and the schwa. And in ice and eyes, the leanest fricative z in eyes retains its full voice in the word final position. However, if we go from the phonemic transcription to the phonetic one, from theory to practice and actual speech, then we'll find some changes. So that the leanest fricative z in zeal can become devoiced in actual speech, well, especially when it appears together with other Phonetic consonants, as for example in great seal, where the Phonetic plosive t influences the quality of the following leanest fricative z in zeal and devoices it, so that great zeal becomes great seal. And this process in phonetics is known as progressive assimilation. There is no devoicing of the leanest fricative z in razor because it appears in the voiced environment between vowels. The leanest fricative z in eyes, the plural ending of the word eye, can become devoiced in actual speech. And again, especially when it appears together with other fortis fricatives, affricates, or plosives, as for example in my eyes shut, where the fortis fricative sh in shut influences the quality of the preceding lenis fricative z in eyes and devoices it, so that eyes becomes eyes, with my eyes shut. And this process in phonetics is known as regressive assimilation. The description of consonants in terms of fortis and lenis, that's Latin for strong and soft, concern their articulation rather than voice. So we can say that fortis consonants p, t, k, ch, f, th, s, and sh require stronger articulation and greater breath force than their lenis counterparts. Fortis plosives p, t, k in stress-soluble initial position are aspirated, and their lenis counterparts are not. So p, t, k in pi, tie, and kate are aspirated, whereas b, d, g in bi, die, and gate are not. And do remember that aspiration disappears when fortis plosives appear in combination with the fortis fricative s, as in stop. Besides fortis stops p, t, k, and ch in syllable final position frequently have a reinforcing glottal stop. Well, the mechanism of the production of the glottal stop was described in the previous lecture. You can see the symbol for a glottal stop in the phonetic transcriptions here. Sleep, catnip, locksmith, watchdog. This phenomenon is known in phonetics as glottal reinforcement or pre-glottalization of consonants. Finally, vowels are shortened before fortis consonants, and vowels retain their full length before lenis consonants. In the first minimal pair, the duration of the fleece vowel in beat is perceived a bit shorter than that in bead, and the duration of the thought vowel in source is perceived as being a bit shorter than that in sword. And the length of the diphthong I in white is perceived as being a bit shorter than that in wide. And the length of the nasal sonorant n in tent is perceived as being a bit shorter than that in tend. This phenomenon is known in phonetics as pre-fortis clipping.